Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said, "Taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. We accept we must pitch in to build roads, fund schools, and maintain our courts. But baked into that exchange is an economic paradox. Every dollar the government collects in taxes actually drains more than a dollar's worth of value out of the economy. To understand why, we first have to picture an economy functioning in perfect health. When a free market reaches its natural balance, the equilibrium point where buyers and sellers agree on a price, it generates maximum happiness. Economists measure this happiness in two parts: consumer surplus, which is the benefit buyers get from scoring a deal below their maximum budget, and producer surplus, the profit sellers make above their minimum costs. Add those two triangles together, and you get total surplus. In a frictionless, zero-tax world, society is operating at peak economic efficiency. Every trade that benefits both a buyer and a seller happens. But peak efficiency doesn't pave highways. To fund infrastructure, the government has to step in and disrupt that perfect balance by levying a tax. And it doesn't matter whether the law says the buyer pays the tax at the register or the seller pays it out of their revenue. The mechanical outcome on the market is exactly the same. This chart reveals the disruption. The tax drives a wedge between parties, forcing the buyer's price up and the seller's price down. Because buyers pay more and sellers earn less, trade shrinks. The goods sold slides backward, falling well below the original equilibrium. On this updated graph, we see exactly what the government gets from this intervention. Multiplying the tax size per unit by the lower quantity of goods sold yields this red rectangle. That is the total tax revenue, the cash collected to fund the state. The state has successfully extracted its money. But by shrinking the overall volume of trade, that revenue rectangle has carved a permanent void into our original, perfectly efficient total surplus. On this graph, the market is mapped out into individual lettered sections, which helps us trace exactly where the missing value goes. Economists call the empty space left behind by a tax the dead weight loss. Before the tax, the entire area belonged to buyers and sellers. Now, the government manages to capture the inner blocks, areas B and D, transferring that value from citizens to the public treasury to pay for services. But notice the triangle formed by areas C and E. The government didn't collect that value as revenue, the buyers didn't keep it, and the sellers didn't earn it. It simply vanished. That dead weight loss represents mutually beneficial trades that never happened because the tax priced the buyers and sellers out of the market. Because this value evaporates entirely, the true cost a tax inflicts on society is larger than the actual revenue it generates. To minimize this destruction, policymakers have to determine exactly what to tax. This depends on elasticity, the measure of how much buyers and sellers change their behavior in response to a price change. These charts show two highly inelastic markets.
Think of necessities like life-saving medication or basic groceries. When the government taxes these items, the price goes up, but buyers have no choice but to keep buying. Because the volume of trade barely changes, the deadweight loss, that blue triangle, stays very small. Compare that to the highly elastic markets in panels B and D. These are luxury goods or items with easy substitutes. If you tax them, people simply stop buying. The volume of trade collapses, and the deadweight loss triangle expands into a massive economic crater. Targeting highly elastic markets maximizes the volume of lost trade, creating significant societal loss for relatively little government gain. Knowing this, a government might think the solution is to find an inelastic market and just tax it heavily to fund massive spending programs. But the relationship between the tax rate and the resulting economic loss is not linear. This three-part diagram illustrates what happens as a tax scales from small to medium to large. The dead weight loss triangle grows quadratically. If you double the size of a tax, the area of economic destruction quadruples, rapidly dominating the entire graph. But look closely at the blue tax revenue rectangle in that third panel. By pushing the tax rate so high, the government has choked off so much trade that the total cash collected actually shrinks. This relationship is mapped entirely by this graph, known as the Laffer curve. It shows that as tax sizes increase, revenue initially rises, peaks, and then plunges as the underlying market suffocates. Push past that tipping point, and a government's demand for more revenue mathematically guarantees it will defund itself, while effectively dismantling the market's ability to create value for its citizens. In the real world, this curve became the foundation of supply-side economics. This is the highly controversial political strategy, which argues that if a country is currently sitting on the downward slope of the Laffer curve, the government can actually increase its total tax revenue by aggressively cutting the tax rate, stimulating a massive wave of new economic activity. This historical data table tracks major policy shifts that seem to prove the theory. Following massive cuts to top tax rates during the Reagan and Thatcher administrations in the 1980s, both governments saw their overall federal receipts surge. And the counter-evidence is equally stark. Look at the labor supply table below. In the 1990s, as France aggressively hiked its tax rates to nearly 60%, its average work week plummeted well below the United States, sending a clear, low-effort signal across its economy. We are left with a permanent dilemma. A civilized society absolutely requires tax revenue to function. Yet the tools used to extract that revenue are blunt, destructive instruments that require near impossible precision to deploy, without crushing the very markets they rely on. And if balancing these forces is this difficult inside a closed domestic economy, what happens when governments weaponize these exact same tools against international trade, using tariffs?